Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Julie Hill. I'm the Horticulture Outreach Specialist for Rock and Walworth counties. And I have along with me here Margaret Murphy. She is a Horticulture Outreach Specialist serving Dunn, Chippewa, and Eau Claire counties. So we want to welcome everybody to today's webinar about growing strawberries in containers. Margaret and I will be your moderators for today. So we just want to tell you to please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. You should be able to find that right at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer or a laptop. If you're on some sort of mobile device, then tap your screen and then that menu will come up. So again, use the Q&A for questions. We will not be using the chat for any types of questions. And we are recording this webinar. The link will be added on our horticulture website where you registered for the webinar. So we will add the link to the recording next week after we have it ready. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Darrin Kimber. He is an agriculture extension educator for University of Wisconsin-Madison's Division of Extension serving Iron County. He provides research-based horticulture and agricultural assistance to the residents of Iron County and does have a focus on commercial maple syrup production. Darrin is an avid canoeist and a general outdoor enthusiast. He and his wife own Taiga Farm and Vineyards in Ironwood Township, Michigan, and they raise Icelandic sheep, pastured pigs, produce, and wine grapes. So I'll turn over to you, Darrin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie and Margaret and Jay and Jacob. Let me get my screen up here real quick. And welcome everyone. And I hope everybody can see my screen.
Looks good. Thanks, Darrin.
All right. So welcome everybody. So today we are going to be talking about growing strawberries in containers. And so the question is why containers? Well, not everyone has a space in the ground that is good for growing strawberries. And if you live in an apartment or a condo, or you have a rental home, you may not have access to a lawn or garden. And even if you do own your property, especially in some older neighborhoods or smaller lots, they may be too shaded to give yourself good crops of strawberries if you're planting them in your garden. So containers on your deck, on your windows are a great option for those who would like to be able to grow a little bit of their own food and don't have the space. Also, for those of us who are getting a little older, strawberries grow really close to the ground, and harvesting and caring for them requires you to get down low if they're in the ground. And my knees tend to protest a little more each year when I'm down there. By moving your strawberries into containers, you can set them at levels at heights that allow you easier access if you're starting to experience some of those mobility issues. And finally, strawberry plants can be very pretty, and they can be a component in your ornamentation around your house, your garden, your deck, and they give you that added benefit of being an edible ornamental. So these are all reasons why growing strawberries in containers might work for you. A little bit about the strawberry plant and its biology and why it works well for container growing. They tend to be very short-lived perennials, up to about 3 years before having to replace even the longest-lived ones. They're fairly shallow-rooted, so that makes for a good combination for growing in containers. They do reproduce asexually by stolons and runners, and we'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of that later. And this is where I'm going to get controversial. The seeds that we typically associate with strawberries are actually the fruits, and they're achenes, similar to what you would see in a sunflower fruit, which is also called a seed. And that fleshy fruit that we all enjoy, that is actually a vegetable. It's a modified stem, so it would not be considered a fruit by botanists. Strawberry development is influenced by a lot of environmental factors, but changes in day length affect its flowering and its development. And that's going to influence the types of strawberries you may be putting into your containers. There are three main types of strawberry plants out there, and varieties are lumped into June bearing. Those are the ones that produce a single large crop in June, July, depending on your area in the state. Everbearing is a term that's been around a while. The older varieties in particular used to give you two small crops a year, spring and fall, and then they kind of went dormant or quit flowering during the summertime, the heat of the summer. And then day-length neutral varieties, those are actually everbearing, and those have been developed in the past couple of decades to kind of phase out the everbearing, and they kind of make up for that sort of gap in the flowering season, and they tend to flower throughout the whole season, giving you a continuous crop of strawberries through the growing season. We'll go over each of the different types in a little bit of detail and why they may or may not be useful for your containers. The June bears, as I said, they produce a very large crop of flowers and berries at the beginning of the season. And then they start to invest their energies into reproducing asexually with those stolons or runners, and can get quite aggressive and fill in an open space rather quickly. They make, they can become a great ground cover. But when you are in containers and you have limited space, they may be too aggressive and without pruning those stolons off so that you don't overcrowd your pots. They can be used in container gardens if you're using sort of larger wooden raised beds or other types of containers that tend to have a bigger surface area. They are perennial, and so sometimes they don't produce the first spring when you plant them. So if you are looking at them as a container, realize that you may not get fruit at the beginning of your first season after planting. And these are the ones where if you are a strawberry preserver, where you're wanting to make jams and jellies and such, these are the varieties that you're going to be looking for that. So they are marginally useful in containers and only in the larger containers. And there are a lot of varieties to choose from. Most of your gardening centers are going to have a lot of varieties, and you try to choose the one that's going to fit your climatic zone the best, because they are perennial and they are going to overwinter. Everbears, again, this is an older term. It's still used, and a lot of the varieties that are under the everbearing name are still out there. And as I said before, they produce two small crops, one in the spring, which is a little bit bigger, and then a smaller crop in the fall. Because they are focusing on those additional berries, they produce a lot fewer runners than the June bears. So they tend to be a little less aggressive in filling in the empty spaces, and they work fairly well with containers in that situation. They can be grown as annuals or perennials. And I've listed here a couple of the common varieties you'll find in catalogs or at your nursery centers. Something to be said about all of these, if you are getting them through mail order, usually you're looking at bundles of 25 bare root plants. So keep that in mind when you're ordering. Your local nursery may have potted plants. You can get a lot fewer numbers. And moving on to the day-length neutral varieties. And again, these are, relatively new varieties. Some of them have been around for a couple of decades, but they have been bred to improve continuous flowering throughout the growing season. They are typically grown as annuals. Some of them are not as cold hardy as the everbears or the June bears. But as container plants, they may be best suited for growing on your patio as annuals. And I've listed some of the common varieties here. Again, you can look at when you're going and ordering from the catalog or your nursery center. So this video will be recorded, so you can go back and look at these varieties as we move on here. When looking for containers, it's important to think about the biology of those strawberries and and select your pots or your containers for the situation. If you're going with round pots, you want to really go with a 12-inch diameter or larger pot. They don't have to be super deep because those shallow roots. You can make up. You reduce the weight by not having such a deep pot, but you're going to want as large of a pot as you can if you're going with a round. If you're going with more of a linear rectangular container, it can be fairly narrow because the strawberries are going to drape over either side if you're planting them in a single row. And it should be at least about 2 feet in length if you're going rectangular to get enough plants to produce an adequate number of fruit. We all see the strawberry pots, these terracotta pots at the nursery centers and the box stores. And those are good for creating extra surface area by having those openings along the sides of the pots. So you can get more plants into a pot. But just remember, because you are planting at different levels in the soil, that it is a little more difficult to maintain even moisture and nutrient loads within the soil so that all the plants are getting the adequate amount of moisture and nutrition. So just a concern there that you want to make sure that you are checking the water levels, the moisture levels of the soil in both the top and the sides to make sure you're not drowning one and drowning the other. And here's an example of some planting arrangements in those different types of pots. So you can see probably no more than 3 plants in a 12-inch round container. And you can get more plants in a rectangular linear pot than you can a round pot because they can drape off to the sides. If you crowd your strawberry plants too much, they're not going to, the crowns in particular, they're not going to be able to produce more flower buds when they're shaded. So putting more plants in a pot is not going to give you more berries and may just increase the amount of disease you have. So the strawberries do spread out quite a bit, and so you don't need to crowd them at the beginning. If your cat fits in it, it's probably good to put in 3 or so plants for strawberries. So when looking to plant your containers, some important things you need to consider. Find a suitable location. Strawberries need a lot of sunlight to produce flowers, ergo fruit. So you need at least 6 and preferably closer to 12 plus hours of direct sunlight for maximum production of strawberries in your containers. Invest in good quality potting mixtures and soils. Remember, they are a lot of times very low in nutrients unless you buy a fortified potting mixture like Miracle-Gro. So you're going to want to add a balanced fertilizer and mix it into your soils in following the directions on the container of fertilizer to make sure that you're not over fertilizing and causing over fertility problems in your strawberries. And this is important. It's just like any planting. You don't want to plant too deep and you don't want to plant too shallow in your strawberries. When you look at a strawberry plant, the bare root in particular, you'll notice that it's mostly just some dried leaves with some roots, and there's this little area of subdued stem called the crown. That's where all of the leaf and flower buds are arranged. And so you want that to be at the surface of your soil when you're planting them. Don't bury that, otherwise you may lose your plant, or it may not produce as well. Conversely, you don't want it to stick up so much that you're seeing roots, where that is going to cause you some problems as well. And as you're, as the season goes on, you're going to want to water regularly. And this is not the case of, oh no, it's wilting, I need to water it now. You need to, strawberries need a good, consistent moisture supply to produce well. So you're going to at least water twice a week, more often during those hot, dry spells. And ideally, you're going to water in the mornings if possible, so that the plants can dry off in the morning sun to reduce disease potential. So As you're watering, good rule of thumb is to stick your thumb end to the first knuckle. And if it's dry to your first, to the tip of your finger, that first inch, then you should be watering. And as the season goes along, nutrients are being leached out of that with our watering, and also the plants are taking some up. So you're going to want to add a nitrogen containing fertilizer 2 or 3 times during the season to help maintain good vigor and fruit production. Careful, use something that is designed for growing plants like a liquid emulsion or a slow release. If you use some of the higher concentration nitrogen fertilizers, you can burn the plants if you're not careful. So use something that's kind of designed for a foliar or time release. If you are using something like fish emulsion, remember, if these are close to your windows or your house, check that fertilizer for its scent. Even deodorized ones can make it smell like a bait shop if you on the first couple of days after fertilizing. So check that. And as you see dead leaves or diseased fruits and or heavily diseased leaves, you're going to want to remove those to keep the disease pressure down. Remember, if we're growing these as annuals, we're less worried about some of the perennial diseases out there. And by just clipping those diseased fruits and leaves off, you're going to help keep a more vigorous plant. Speaking of the pests and diseases, I'm just going to list a few. If you go to any fact sheet, they spend a lot of time talking about everything that could harm your plants. And it gets kind of scary and intimidating. These are just a few of the more common ones, and most of these are cosmetic, especially in the in an annual grown strawberry container. Gray mold, which you'll see on the tips of your strawberries. You'll see that sometimes on strawberries that you purchase at the store and let sit in the fridge for too long. You'll see a little gray mold come on. Leaf spot, leaf scorch, leaf blight, all of those, they can be managed in roughly the same way. And that, again, is watering early in the morning, not overcrowding your plants, and promptly removing, indicated diseased material out of the plants before they have a chance to spread. And these particular diseases, I would not be too concerned about as far as fungicides or other types of chemical treatments. These can be managed culturally or mechanically. And it's the same with the insects. Aphids and spider mites can be a problem for plants, especially young growing tips. The last one, spotted wing Drosophila, that can be somewhat destructive, especially in the later crops of your strawberries. Their populations tend to build over the season, and they tend to cause problems as the season goes on. And finally, so when the season's over with your day neutral plants, if you're going to plant them, grow them as annuals, you're just going to discard those plants responsibly, compost them, bury them, landfill them so that you don't spread disease, and clean and store those containers appropriately. Ceramic pots and clay pots, do not do winter well. They will spall or crack. So clean those, dry them out, bring them into a place where they're not going to experience a lot of severe cold changes. And with June bearing plants, decide if you are going to overwinter, you can just use them as annuals as well. Move into an unheated garage or basement if you have a smaller container. And if it's a larger container or raised bed, you're going to want to mulch that entire container with about 6 inches of good loose quality mulch like straw. And here are some resources that will be put into the chat for people to look at for further information on growing strawberries in containers. And I am available for questions now.
Thank you so much, Darrin. I really appreciate that. And this photo is making me extremely hungry. So I think that is a great way to end your presentation. I also want to mention that we will be putting in the chat a link to a survey. So we'd love for you to fill out a quick evaluation survey. It doesn't take very long. That link will be in the chat. Margaret also was posting all those resources that Darrin showed. She posted the links to those in the chat too. So you should be able to grab them right from there. And we will get to questions. I'll try to get get to as many as possible in the time that we have left. So I want to back up to when you were talking about containers and choosing your pots, and you had mentioned some kind of diameter or the length. What about the depth of the pot? How deep should it be?
You don't have to go with a super deep pot. Again, these strawberries are not a very deep rooted plant, and a deep pot, a lot of times the water will actually, filtrate below the rooting depth of the strawberries. So it's more of surface area than depth that is important. So you can go with a fairly shallow container for strawberries and be secure that they'll do well.
Okay. And what about window boxes? As long as that's secure, I know with a window box, making sure it has support on the house or wherever it's attached to, and things like that, but that would still be okay.
Right. I mean, you don't need to go anything deeper than, say, an 8-inch probably pot. Just remember, window boxes tend to be fairly extreme climates that, that if you have a brick wall or something that's absorbing a lot of sun, you may have a lot more heat stress. So you want to make sure you're checking that moisture level a little bit more regularly in a window box.
Okay. And another question, we had several questions about varieties. So how do you go about choosing what variety to grow?
Well, with June bears, it's very important that you consider your climatic zone, because those are perennial and you're most likely going to be overwintering if you're going to get a crop. As far as the other varieties, the everbears and the day neutrals, look at the description of them, because they're going to talk about the sweetness and size of the berries. Because these are likely going to be grown as annuals, you're less worried about their hardiness. And so you're looking at more of those characteristics that make them good for containers and good for eating, because, we want to be able to snack on them. And if you've got a berry that's not maybe hitting your palate right, you may not want to go that way. But a lot of times there's great descriptions on the varieties on the characteristics of the fruit. And that's a good way to determine variety for you. And also what's available to you. That's always the limiting factor a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely. We kind of on this variety question, are there any varieties that maybe are less appealing to our deer and bunny friends, which I know I have in my yard, they always grab the strawberries before I get to them, or any that might be more resistant to certain diseases or problems like that?
Right. So, I mean, if you're doing container gardens, hopefully the deer are not coming up on the patio on the deck. They might be. Very well, and you could have these containers out into the garden and such. I find strawberries to be fairly resistant to browsing. It is when they go into fruit. I have chipmunks that come and snatch my strawberries just as they're ripe. I even had chickens break in last year. We had to fence our strawberries because our chickens found them to be delicious and harvest them for us. So there's not anything I know of that's going to help other than physical barriers against the critters and the berries themselves. But I've found that deer and rabbits don't tend to damage the plants them so much with browsing. As far as disease, there are different levels of disease resistance. And those are usually indicated in your mail order catalog, verticillium wilt, bacterial angular spot, those are going to be listed in as a thing. Again, if you are growing them annually, a lot of these disease problems are something that builds over time and sometimes generations. And by growing them annually and then scrubbing and cleaning those pots really well and using new potting mixture each year, you're going to minimize that disease chance anyway. Also watering properly.
Sure. We had some questions about the runners. So do you have any tips for managing the runners? Is it best to cut them off right away, or, should we cut them off and make a new plant out of them and pot those? What's your advice?
Well, that's up to you. If you want to keep creating containers of strawberries, yeah, you can just clip them and send those. Once that little daughter plant has developed, you can go ahead and put that in another pot. You can clip them early if you don't want them to crowd in the rest of them. But if you are using in a larger raised bed or something, you may want them to fill in some gaps, or you may want them to replace the old plant because, again, they're very short-lived perennials. So using the runners as a way to fill in those gaps will help you not have to purchase more plants. Again, the June bears are the ones that produce the most aggressive amount of runners. They can produce upwards of 100 a season. So going to the June or the everbears or the day neutral, because they are focusing primarily on flower and fruit production, they tend to put out a lot fewer runners in general.
Okay. We had some questions about transplanting. Can we transplant existing strawberry plants that maybe are in the garden to a container, or should we just start over and purchase new plants?
That is up to you. If those plants are healthy, I would say, yes, sure, go ahead and do that. But if you've had incidents of disease, all you're going to do is be spreading the disease on the soil that's on those roots or on those plants themselves. So it's entirely up to you on that, the comfort level there. But if it's a fairly clean planting, sure, there's no problem there. Again, it's going to depend on the June versus everbearer and what kind of pots and containers you have.
Okay. We had some questions, Darrin, about fertilizer. So I know you mentioned nitrogen fertilizer. So there was a question about why not using a balanced fertilizer. Some questions about maybe what fertilizer you recommend and the timing of when.
Sure. Usually we tell people to get a soil test for their in-ground plantings and such. With containers, sometimes that's not, economical or easy. But if you're starting with a sterile potting mix, they don't have a lot of nutrients. And I do recommend that you use a balanced fertilizer as an establishment fertilizer. You're going to mix that into the soil, and that's going to be something like a 10-10-10 or a 14-14-14. And again, follow the directions on the amount. The nitrogen containing one is sort of adding in throughout the season to promote continued foliage growth. It should still have some, phosphorus and potassium, the P and the K in there, but it should have a little more nitrogen, but not a lot. Again, we don't want a lot of foliage. We want to continue the flower buds to being formed.
Okay. And there was some questions here. Should we start from seeds or should we get plants or, how should we get started?
I would recommend through plants, either bare root or potted plants. Seeds, you got to remember, won't because they're produced sexually. They will not necessarily breed true to the plants that you started with, and especially if you're getting strawberries in the supermarket. Those plants are designed for production and commercial use, those plants, and so they don't necessarily translate well to growing in a container for the home gardener.
Okay. And then when should we plant? There was a question, when should we plant for the June bearing? Should we plant those this spring yet in April or May? And then I know I saw another question about, can strawberries be planted in the fall?
Yep. You can plant the June bears in the fall if you like. But you definitely can plant this year. Again, you may not have a spring crop on your June bears. In fact, it's a good idea to pinch those first flower buds. You can plant, right around just before the end of frost. Strawberries are pretty hardy, and they're low growing, so you can go out there and cover them a couple of times if you need to. You don't need to wait until after Memorial Day or something. You can get those, in May or late April, depending on where you're at in the state.
Okay. And can you cover mulching again quickly? I know we got about a minute left here. I know there were some questions about mulching outdoor plants or the container plants or using pine needles for mulch, if that would be acceptable. Yeah. What do you recommend?
Pine needles, leaves are the ones that are going to be the most problematic for mulching because they mat, and that causes a problem for those low growing plants like strawberries. If you're going to keep the container outside because you want to protect the roots, you want to mulch the entire container, not just the plants themselves. And so creating a chicken wire cage around the container that's going to give you at least 6 inches of mulch material all the way around is the best way to mulch those containers. Again, avoid terracotta and clay or ceramic pots because they tend to spall and break. But if you've got wood or plastic or metal, then go ahead and create that. Pine needles work fine. Straw works fine. Those are loose. They have a lot of air pockets in them. They don't mat down as well. And so those make great mulch materials. And they're also usually free of weed seeds.
Great. Thank you so much, Darren, for sharing with us about how to grow strawberries in containers. We're going to post in the chat one more time a link to an evaluation survey, and check the website for the recording of this webinar as well as the previous webinars we did. And we'll have some more coming up in May. So thank you, everybody.